The CDC is now holding an emergency meeting amid these global concerns, as you point out, Anne-Marie, over the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. All 50 states have agreed to halt the vaccine's rollout after six women suffered from severe blood clots. That was following the single dose shot. Now, we should remind folks that this comes despite more than 7 million Johnson & Johnson doses that have already been administered across the country. President Biden and top health officials say the government is putting safety first by pausing the vaccine's rollout. Nancy Cordes reports.
Vaccine sites across the country had to make a quick pivot away from Johnson & Johnson Tuesday as states began canceling some appointments and rebooking others for different vaccines.
A little sad because I like the one and done.
FDA officials recommended the pause after 6 women in the U.S. developed serious blood clots.
It's out of an abundance of caution.
Johnson & Johnson described it as an extremely rare disorder as governors downplayed the news.
Hopefully this is just a small setback that we will overcome.
This is an abundance of caution.
But behind the scenes, in a conference call with White House officials, state leaders expressed frustration.
The ability for governors to reinstill confidence after something like this is 100 times harder than putting the pause on in the first place.
Kent Koster, the public health director in Kentucky's Purchase area, told us he's concerned yesterday's announcement will deter some people from getting any of the vaccines.
That is just frustrating for the providers because we know, we're there, we're ready, to give the vaccine, but the people just aren't coming in.
The White House insists the pace of vaccinations will not change much. About 95% of the supply so far has come from Pfizer and Moderna.
So there's enough vaccine that is basically 100% unquestionable for every single solitary American.
Dr. Anthony Fauci told CBS Evening News anchor and managing editor Norah O'Donnell recent recipients of the J&J shot should look out for symptoms, including severe headache, chest discomfort, and difficulty breathing.
It appears that this adverse event occurs within between 6 days and 13 days. So if you're beyond 4 weeks and you've had it a month or two ago, I think you really don't need to worry about anything.
Monica Roberts-Jenkins falls into that category.
It's been maybe about 4 weeks now.
The Houston paralegal says she would get the shot again.
There's side effects pretty much with anything that we take, right? Whether it's, surgeries, medicines, whatever.
All right, let's bring in Nancy Cordes standing by at the White House for us. So, Nancy, in your piece, we heard that behind the scenes, some state leaders expressed frustration to the White House over the Johnson & Johnson news. What is the Biden administration worried about with regards to the political fallout that may come from these developments as the country faces pandemic fatigue? And now you've got people that are using this news, using the headlines to point to the vaccine and say, that's why I don't want to take it.
Right. I'd say that they're far less concerned about political fallout than they are about what you just described, Vlad. The possibility that a certain segment of the population, according to polls, we know about 20% of U.S. adults say they're hesitant to get the vaccine. They're worried that that number either will grow or that it will harden, that people who might have been convinced to go ahead and get one of these vaccines will now feel even more nervous about getting one, especially because Johnson & Johnson has kind of been the vaccine of choice for individuals who either are needle shy or afraid of getting vaccines because it is one and done. So what the administration is trying to argue publicly is that this pause should actually give people more comfort because it shows that the FDA and the CDC are taking any kind of medical concerns seriously, that they're being transparent about how they're handling it, and they're predicting that this will be a very brief pause, maybe just a few days, not weeks or months, in the words of Dr. Anthony Fauci. And finally, they are trying to reassure both the American public and governors around the country that this should not impact supply that much because the lion's share of the supply had already been coming from the other two companies producing vaccines here in the U.S., Pfizer and Moderna. So they say right now that we are still on track to meet that goal of enabling any adult in the U.S. who wants a shot to get one by the end of May.
So just going to switch subjects a little bit. According to a U.S. official, President Biden will withdraw all U.S. troops from Afghanistan by September 11th. That's the 20th anniversary of the terror attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. But during the 2020 campaign, the president said that his preference was to actually leave a counterterrorism force of about 1,500 troops in Afghanistan. So what has changed?
According to a senior administration official, what's changed is that the president has come around to the view that leaving even a small force in the country past the end of this year is a recipe for a permanent presence in Afghanistan, and that he determined, along with other White House officials, that the threat against the U.S. homeland emanating from Afghanistan right now is pretty low and manageable without keeping a permanent military force there. Beyond that, they argue that he has determined that there really is no military solution to the problems that are plaguing Afghanistan right now. And so they concluded that keeping even a small force in Afghanistan was not going to serve U.S. needs very well, was not going to help the Afghan people very much. Although we know that that's a somewhat controversial view on Capitol Hill, and there were Democrats and Republicans yesterday who expressed frustration with this decision. They believe that the U.S. and Afghanistan will both see sort of a backslide in the security situation in the country if the U.S. pulls out entirely.
Nancy, can I also ask you, if maybe we haven't learned yet, but how is President Biden intending to mark the withdrawal of these troops in Afghanistan? Because it's hard to say that the goals that were first espoused by President Bush have been met, but it's also a disservice to the men and women who fought so valiantly there, the lives that were lost, the treasure that was lost, to try and implement that goal. It's sort of, I know that a lot of people right now, especially our fighting men and women, have sort of mixed feelings about this withdrawal. And so it's not mission accomplished, but it's not mission failed either. It's somewhere in the middle. So I'm just curious how President Biden intends to sort of share that message with the American people.
Right. They're really trying to thread the needle here, Vlad, in a way, because on one hand, they're saying we've determined that it is the right time to pull out. On the other hand, they're warning the Afghans, hey, if you try anything, the Taliban in particular, if you try anything, if you attack U.S. troops as we are drawing down our numbers, that the U.S. is prepared to respond aggressively. So, you could see the challenge in messaging for this administration. But this has been a months-long process of the president, top White House officials, the State Department, the Defense Department, all reviewing the options in Afghanistan, which admittedly all have drawbacks, and deciding that the best course forward for now is to remove troops entirely. But they were well aware when they made this decision, and the president is well aware in advance of his speech today that he is going to face some significant pushback, even from members of his own party, moderates who feel that that the U.S. is simply going to usher in a new era of Taliban crackdowns and corruption in Afghanistan if they leave the country entirely.
So the Senate is expected to take its first step at combating the rise of Asian American hate crimes today. Senators are going to be voting on whether or not to open up debate on an anti-Asian American hate crime bill drafted by Democratic lawmakers. Can you remind us a little bit of what the bill would do and how likely it is to have bipartisan support?
Sure. So this bill essentially would direct the Justice Department to expedite the handling of hate crimes, particularly hate crimes connected to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we've obviously seen a rise in those crimes against Asian Americans in particular. And it would also task the department with coordinating with local law enforcement agencies to help them, make outreach to the public, explain to the public how to report those types of crimes, with the hopes that it will raise awareness and crack down on these incidents. There are no Republican co-sponsors of this bill right now, which was authored by Senator Mazie Hirono of Hawaii. But we do have an indication that at least some Republicans will vote in this procedural move today. Chuck Grassley, Republican senator of Iowa, told reporters yesterday that he anticipated Republicans would vote for it. They'll need most likely 10 Republicans or more to vote yes in order to move this bill forward. If they didn't, that would be a pretty significant development, really the first Republican filibuster of this administration. But signs point right now to the likelihood that this is not something that Republicans see major value in standing in the way. But I will tell you that there are Democrats and Republicans who would like to see some changes to this bill. They want to see the Justice Department have a few new powers when it comes to handling hate crimes. And what the authors are saying is the only way that you can offer an amendment to make those changes is if we take this procedural step and vote to move towards the bill. And so that looks like the most likely outcome right now, but we don't know at this point just how many Republicans will vote yes.
So, Nancy, yesterday, the president accepted House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's invitation to speak at a joint session of Congress on April 28th. What can you tell us about that?
I can tell you that the person who's probably happiest that this news is out is Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary, who has been asked about this address practically every day. When is it going to happen? When is the president going to make his first joint address to Congress? This is something that is usually known as the State of the Union, but it isn't during a president's first year in office. It's known as a joint address to Congress. So it is happening. The word is out. It is going to be at the end of this month on the president's 99th day in office, and it's going to look a little different than State of the Unions or joint addresses normally do because of the pandemic. They are not going to be able to allow all of the members of Congress to be there and attend the speech in the House chamber because, they're going to have to stagger people. And that is going to be really fraught. I don't know how you determine which members of Congress get to attend and which don't. So that's going to be an interesting procedure. We'll see how they determine this cutoff, whether they're going to do it by seniority or some other way. You certainly won't have members of the public invited by lawmakers allowed to sit in the House gallery the way they normally do, because the House gallery is going to be needed to seat more of these members of Congress. So physically it will look a little different, but otherwise this will be a traditional speech by the President of the United States, laying out what he feels he has accomplished so far and challenging Congress to do more and laying out some of his goals for the year ahead.
Nancy Cordes, thank you very much.
You're welcome.